So back in 1997, Oprah Winfrey went to Forsyth County, Georgia, a county that had a lot of racial tension, and boasted the fact that no black people lived in Forsyth County. She went down there with her crew, interviewed people, knew that it was going to be a lot of problems. Here's some of the clips from that interview.
They, us, the entire black race, the entire black race.
Blacks and you have.
What's the difference between a black person and you?
I've talked to black people. Black people, they don't want to come up here. They don't want to cause any trouble. That's a black person. A who wants to come up here and cause trouble all the time. That's the difference.
And yeah, it was a pretty bad situation. This was in 1987, and then with the racially charged election of 1988 with Willie Horton and Michael Dukakis, he obviously got destroyed in Forsyth County, only winning 23% of the vote. However, in 2020, Joe Biden won over 30% of the vote in Forsyth County, being the first time a Democrat had actually won more than 30% in the county since Jimmy Carter won back in 1980. And this change that we see in Forsyth County is really representative of a change that is happening in the entire state of Georgia. As a matter of fact, Forsyth County, which wasn't really a rich county before, is now the 19th richest county in the nation and the richest county in Georgia. So there have been a lot of changes, a lot of demographic changes in the state of Georgia. In today's video, we're going to talk about how Democrats can win Georgia and win this ever-changing Georgia, and talk about how this state has made a dramatic shift in who people target in this election. Now, before we talk about nowadays, let's go ahead and look a little bit at the political history of Georgia to get an idea of how democratic it is. And in recent years, it really has not been. If we look at the presidential election results, we see Jimmy Carter won it twice, both in 1976 and 1980. Bill Clinton won it once in 1992, famously losing it in 1996, a state that he was expecting to win. And then Joe Biden, the first real non-Southerner to win it since the old Dixiecrat days, winning it barely in 2020. So this state has mostly voted for Republicans compared to Democrats. And this isn't just at the presidential level as well. This is also at the state level, where as we look at Governor Roy Barnes, he was the last Democrat to hold the office of governorship in Georgia. And this is over 20 years ago. And before Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff won their Senate races, the last time there was a Democratic senator was Zell Miller back in 2005. Now, Zell Miller gave one of the best convention speeches for the Democrats back in 1992. Check that speech out if you haven't seen it yet. But then a few years later, he goes to the Republican convention in 2004, endorses George W. Bush, and then challenges Chris Matthews of MSNBC to a duel.
I wish we lived in the day where you could challenge a person to a duel. Now that would be pretty good. But don't pull that. Don't pull that. Wait a minute.
Yeah, I've always loved that clip. But anyways, the state of Georgia in the early and mid 2000s started becoming less and less Democratic. As a matter of fact, in 2012, it wasn't even considered a target state. It was so Republican, in fact, that the major networks didn't even do exit polls for Georgia. They just said, nope, it's not even worth it. We're not going to even do exit polls. And that's 2012. We're not talking about that long ago. When Hillary Clinton ran in 2016, there was now all of a sudden a thought that she could possibly win the state. And obviously, when it came to Joe Biden, he did win the state. So there is a changing dynamic in the state. So why is this state changing, and how can the Democrats win it? So the first thing we're going to look at are the political demographics of Georgia. Now, the white population has shifted very, very slightly. So back in 2004, the exit poll said that George W. Bush won about 74 to 76% of the white vote. Nowadays, that number is about 69 to 70%. So there has been a little bit of a change, but there hasn't been this huge drastic change. Now, if there is one change that has happened, is that white voters have gone from roughly around 70% of the votes to down around 61% of the vote. Interesting, when it comes to black voters, we really haven't seen that much change. If we look at the exit poll back in 2004, we see that 88% of black voters supported John Kerry. And then if we look at the Biden election, the same 88% also supported Joe Biden. The only difference has been is there's been a 4% increase in the amount of voters who are Black compared to 2004. So we are seeing a little bit of an increase, but not necessarily a huge one that would be a reason why we would see this huge shift into the state of Georgia. Now, there is one big group that has made a big shift in Georgia since 2004. So in 2004, Hispanic voters, which were only about 4% of the vote, according to the CNN exit poll, voted 56% for George W. Bush. They were a very strong Bush voting bloc. But in 2020, we flipped that number. 7% of the population is now Hispanic in the 2020 election, and they voted 58% for Joe Biden. So when it comes to Hispanic voters, we really see this humongous change happening, which could be one of the reasons why the Democrats are doing so much better in the state of Georgia. So the last group I want to talk about are Asian Americans, who can actually be the make or break difference for the Democrats in this election. Now, previously, Asian Americans were not even showing up in exit polls because their numbers were too small. And this happened all the way up to 2020. They weren't even in the exit polls. But in the U.S. Senate race in 2022, when they did the exit polls, they actually were represented because the sample size was large enough. And when we look at Raphael Warnock, he won 58% of the Asian vote. So this has now become a stronger Democratic voting bloc. But interestingly, most of these voters are Indian American, Pakistani American, Bangladeshi American, and Sri Lankan American. So you're talking about the Indian subcontinent where a lot of these people come from, and with Kamala Harris being the first Indian American candidate to run, this can have a huge impact on the race. And we're going to be talking about them more in the county level analysis. So if we look at the political geography of Georgia, we see that not much has changed over the years. So right now, about 42% of the overall vote in the state comes from the Democratic counties in the Atlanta metro area. That's basically the same percentage as 2004, 2000, and even earlier elections. So we don't see this massive shift of the electorate changing from one geographical location to the other. It's stayed pretty stagnant throughout the years. However, the margins within some of these regions have changed drastically, which is the reason why Democrats can now compete in the state of Georgia. So when we're talking about the metro Atlanta area, we're really talking about a handful of counties, which is Fulton County, where Atlanta is located, Cobb County, Clayton County, Douglas County, DeKalb County, Gwinnett County, Rockdale County, Henry County, and Newton County. So back in 2004, John Kerry only won about 50.7% of these counties combined. So it was a very, very close race. However, if we look at 2020, we see that Joe Biden won 67.6% of the vote here. So you can see the vote has drastically changed in the region, which is the reason, again, why Democrats are becoming more and more competitive. Now let's go ahead and look at the counties individually. We're going to kind of put these counties in the metro Atlanta area into kind of similar categories, and we're going to kind of clump them together. But we are going to start first with Fulton County, which is where Atlanta's located. Now, if you can see in Fulton County, John Kerry won 59.2% of the vote back in 2004, and Biden now recently won 72.6%. So we see a drastic shift. If we look at the white population, it has gone down quite a bit, or by about 9%. And actually, the black population has gone down in the county as well. One thing that we have seen as far as a real shift is Hispanic voters going from 5.9% to 8.1%, but Asian Americans, who at the time in 2000 were less than 1% of the population, they are now, according to the most recent census in 2020, 7.6% of the population. So as I mentioned before, these Asian American numbers are going to be very, very important when it comes to winning this region. So you can already see in Fulton County how they really have the balance of power when it comes to determining where the election might go. Let's go ahead and now look at some of the more traditional black majority counties and see how those have shifted over the last few decades. So in DeKalb County, we had 72.5% for Gore and 83.1% for Biden. So we do see a good 10%, 11% Trump. Now, when we see the white population, it has decreased slightly. And you can see again, the black population has decreased slightly as well. Hispanic voters were at 7.5%. They're now at 10.7%. And again, Asian Americans have doubled up from being 2.9% to 6.6%. Now, if we go to, all right, so let's go to Clayton County, which is very similar to DeKalb County with a large black population, but we can see that Clayton County went from 70.6% for Kerry to 85% for Biden, a huge shift. Now, one of the reasons why we see this huge shift is that the white population is basically non-existent. They were 34.7% in 2000, but now in the latest census, they're at 10%, and possibly with recent estimates, they could be under 10%, whereas the black population is essentially at 70%, and Hispanics being at 14.3, being a larger population than the white population there. So this has now become essentially the strongest Democratic county in the state of Georgia. Now, the other two counties that we're going to talk about are Cobb and Gwinnett County. Now, these counties were very, very similar to the old traditional Republican 1980s types of counties. So if you know about DuPage County in the Chicagoland area, these counties were very much like that. They were strongly Republican, but they were more Republican when it came to economic issues, but less Republican when it came to social issues. However, one might think that these counties have changed because all of a sudden you have this influx of white liberals going in there. That's not really the case. So let's go ahead and look at the demographics of these counties and see where the changes are really happening. So we'll first start with Cobb County, famously known as the home of Newt Gingrich. And as you can see, back in 2004, John Kerry only got 37.1% of the vote, while Joe Biden this time around got 56.3%. Now, the white population has gone from 69% all the way down to 50%, and the black population has increased somewhat as well, from 18.8 to 26.6. You can see also the Hispanic vote is essentially doubled up, and nearly the same for the Asian vote. So with the electorate in Cobb County becoming less white, it is also becoming more Democratic. Now, if we go to Gwinnett County, and this is a pretty big one here, we see that Kerry actually did worse in Gwinnett than Cobb County. So he only won 33.4% in Gwinnett County, whereas Biden won more than he did in Cobb County, in Gwinnett County, 58.4%. So if you look at the white population, unlike Cobb, it has gone down significantly. It went from 67% back in the 2000 census to 35.5% in the most recent 2020 census. Black population has doubled in that time. Hispanic population has more than doubled, and the Asian population, being at 13.3%, has the largest Asian population of any county in the state of Georgia. Now, this is why I mentioned Asian Americans and particularly Indian Americans, because these are the places that we see in Gwinnett and in Cobb County that we're going to see them have a big impact. So as far as the overall population, there are around 140,000 Indian Americans in this region. So having an Indian American candidate like Kamala Harris in this election can have a big impact here. And now we can see that these counties aren't really changing because you have a bunch of white liberals coming in, like you might see in, let's say, Asheville, North Carolina, or something like that. What it is the demographics are changing themselves, which also means we can no longer look at Georgia politically as this pure black and white state. And I think a lot of people do. They say black turnout is important because it has to offset the white voters. Hispanic voters and particularly Asian voters are becoming the tipping point for this state. The more and more Democrats do better with them, the better that they're going to do in the election, have a better chance of winning. So while obviously turning out African American voters is very, very important, targeting these groups of voters are also very important. Now we're going to go ahead and look at the last few counties that are south of the Atlanta area and that we've seen some major changes in over the last 20 years. So let's go ahead and look at those. So we look at Rockdale County, we see that John Kerry only won 38.9% back in 2004, and Biden has now won 70% in 2020. The white population went from essentially 73% to 27%. The black population has more than doubled. As a matter of fact, tripled basically from 18.3% to 58.2%. and the Hispanic population has gone up as well. And then if we go to Henry County, we can see that the white population also has fallen quite a bit, from 80% to 37%. When it comes to the black population, it is basically tripled or more than tripled in this area, 14.7% in 2000 to 49%. Hispanic population has more than doubled as well as the Asian population increasing. And then finally, the other county that is very similar here is Newton County, where again, Kerry got 37.5% of the vote. Now Joe Biden had 54.9%. Now, in this case, the white voters are still a larger percentage of the population, but have had a major fall, going from 74% to essentially 43%, while the black population has essentially doubled from 22.4% to 46.9%. Now, the Hispanic population has definitely had an impact because they have now tripled over that same time. Now, that's it mostly for the metro Atlanta area. We're not going to go into it too much more, but there are other counties that are having shifts. But if you are the Democrats, you have to realize that 57% of your vote comes from these counties, and that number can be increasing each and every year. Now, there are other cities like Athens, Georgia, Augusta, Savannah, Macon, and Columbus, and the counties that these cities are in, and people might think that has a big part of the Democratic vote. And while it is important for the Democrats, they only account for about 11% of the votes. So if we look at the Democratic vote, the residual votes outside of these counties and the Atlanta metro area actually make up for a lot of those votes. So a lot of these will be in the southwest part of Georgia, where the 2nd Congressional District is, Sanford Bishop's District, which is part of the Black Belt, and other residual votes that we have in maybe some more suburban counties in and maybe the exurbs of the Atlanta area. So the biggest problem that the Republicans have in the state of Georgia right now is that the places where the population is actually seeing a boom, you're actually seeing the Democratic vote go up as well and the Republican vote go down. In places where you are seeing the Republican vote go up, such as much of the north of Georgia, you're starting to see it just go through the roof in that area. The population growth is happening. It's basically happening throughout the entire state, but not at the rate that we see it in other places. So essentially what's happening is the place where the Republicans are getting stronger and stronger, they're just not growing at the rate that the places that the Democrats are getting stronger and stronger. Now, this brings us full circle to Forsyth County. Now, Forsyth County has seen a lot of these changes and is really a representation of what Georgia's going through. Now, it is still a Republican county because it still has a majority of white voters, but the demographics are changing quite rapidly. So let me go ahead and show you the graphic for that. All right, so as we see in Forsyth County here, we see John Kerry having 16.2% of the vote in 2004 to Joe Biden having 32.6% of the vote in 2020. So this is a drastic change in the vote, and that is the best a Democrat had done in the county since Jimmy Carter back in 1980. But you can see that the demographic changes have actually had an impact on that. So if we look at the 2000 census, we see that the county is overwhelmingly white, with 92.4% of the county being white and 5.6% being Hispanic, but almost all the other demographics are very, very small. As a matter of fact, black population back in 1987, as we saw in the video, they boasted that they did not have any black people. Now they had 0.4% of the population being black in 2000. But now if we look at 2020, we see a drastic change with white population going down significantly, the black population going up as well, but the Hispanic one nearly doubling. That statistic nearly doubles. But the most important one here, and as I've mentioned in Gwinnett County, Cobb County, and other places, the Asian American population going from 0.8% in 2000 to up to 18% in 2020. And one of the reasons why this county is now one of the richest counties in the nation and the richest county in Georgia. Now, one thing before we conclude, I just want to show you the media market. So here's a map of the media markets here. And you can see there are a lot of media markets in and around Georgia. And of course, the Atlanta media market, being, I believe, the 7th largest in the nation, is the biggest, is the most expensive. And if you are the Democrats, is really the market you are going to concentrate in. But the good thing is, if you want to get into maybe the Columbus media market or other places where you have some more rural black voters that you'd like to get out to turn out to vote, those markets are really, really cheap to play in. So they could throw money into a lot of cheaper markets in Georgia to kind of cover the whole entire state. But your most expensive, your most concentrated one will be the Atlanta media market. So let's go ahead and conclude this video on how do Democrats win the state of Georgia. Now, one of the problems that we've had for years and years and years when looking at Georgia, especially recently, is we just look at white population, black population, 70% Republican, 88% Democrat. They're just going to bash it out, right? And whoever is able to win that battle is going to win the state. But now the state has changed so much demographically, even though these are the two largest groups of people in the state, there is a large Hispanic population now. There is a large Asian population now, especially Indian American population with Kamala Harris on the ballot. These elections are about margins. These elections, especially in a state like Georgia, are about winning by a few thousand votes, heck, maybe even a few hundred votes. And if you are turning out your base in many of these counties, you need to ask yourself, where are the tipping points? Obviously, Hispanic voters, as we see, they have grown throughout the metro Atlanta area. They are a really important part. However, I say look at the Indian American voters and how they have become such a voting bloc in places like Forsyth County and Gwinnett County and part of Cobb County as well. You are talking about thousands and thousands of voters who now might be more motivated to vote for somebody like Kamala Harris, who is Indian American as well. These voting blocks are becoming very large in the state of Georgia, at least within the counties that really matter. And when we're talking about thousands and thousands of voters that can be going toward the Democratic side in a state that might only be determined by a few thousand votes, it is really important. So to me, the way the Democrats win, turn out the black vote. Obviously, if you don't do that, you can't win. But really focus on, switching the minds of many Hispanic voters, getting them to turn out more, but really focusing on that Indian American population. The Indian American population, that's going to be it. That's where the whole entire state, that's where the tipping point is. All right, well, thank you all very much for joining me today. If you like this channel and like what I do, please go ahead, go down below and subscribe and just click the bell so you're notified about more videos as well. Thank you all very much. Have a wonderful day wherever it is you are, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye.